So my name is Hannah Opdyke and I'm doing my presentation on police forces on a global scale. So while there has been a lot of talk around the United States and their policing in recent years, other countries really haven't been highlighted as much, really only in comparison to the United States and their issues. So many democracies take different approaches on how best to utilize police force for their nation specifically, with more and more countries, such as the Scandinavian region, they're beginning to incorporate less weaponry and punishment and replace it with more training and alternative dispute solutions. So rather than using violence and force as their first step, where it should be a last resort, they focus more on dissipating the tension in regards to the crime that's being dealt with. So I did a 3 case study for my presentation, and I'm going to be focusing on Ireland, the United States, and Russia. So before I get into that, I'm going to talk a little bit about policing in democracies. So in a democratic state, the police force is the central element. And this is a little quote from a paragraph in the Encyclopedia of Democracy. So they describe police force that is subject to the rule of law rather than wishes of a powerful leader or party. They can intervene in the life of citizens only under limited and carefully controlled circumstances, and they're publicly accountable. So evidently, police can be seen as either a support or a threat to a democracy depending on their followings of the rule of law and morality. And this can apply to the individual officer or that specific department or the nation as a whole. So next I'm going to talk about something that I came across in my research that I thought would be really interesting to include. So it's policing as a concept, dealing with Marxism. So in a Marxist society, police officers would have to find themselves a spot in the class ranks according to Marxist values. So they must be seen as a necessity to the majority. And I have this little question here that I thought was really interesting to implement into my presentation. So, if intended to defend and protect the ruling class, how would police forces and the community coexist in a Marxist system where state and capitalistic maintenance isn't needed? So, I really took that as we in the United States see police very differently, and they rule very differently because they deal with a completely different system rather than a Marxist system. So I guess the question is, how would police really work in a Marxist society in regards to our values and our rule of law? Another thing that I did want to add is this quote from Karl Marx that I really don't know much about, but I did do some deeper research that I didn't add into the presentation. But the quote is, "The state is the machine that saves the domination of a class." And I really just interpreted that as it's not necessarily the creation of a particular class that's an issue, but the class, also known as the police, is a whole entire new category being implemented into their system, which they don't know if it's necessary or not. And that can only really be decided by the majority of people. So it's just really fun to see and compare different ideologies and concepts from different people because we really don't learn about this stuff in school. So I'm going to move on to Ireland as a nation now. So they are controlled by British government. They've been controlled by this for the past 200 years. And they basically just cover the social, economic, and political aspects. They do run under one national civilian police force with approximately 14,500 members, and spend approximately 24 million on law enforcement yearly. There really wasn't much in regards to specific tactics that Ireland uses. It's really just your basic protect and serve. But something I did find interesting was the shoot to kill policy that was in effect from 1969 to 1998, where Ireland's law enforcement were allowed to shoot and kill alleged terrorists without attempting to arrest them or even interrogate them, which was just really crazy to me. The next nation that I'm going to hit on is the United States. So they have approximately 18,000 law enforcement agencies. That's including state, local, and federal. They spend about 1% total GDP on police forces yearly, and in recent years, they've been criticized for poor training, which includes but's not limited to misusing of weapons or force, failure to acknowledge racial inequalities, as well as excessive fines and abuse of asset forfeiture, which is seizing assets used in a crime. Some people believe that police officers use this to their advantage to try and profit off of people who might have not even been admitted to that crime. So this is just a little infographic of just how much the United States state and local police spend per capita. So I'm looking at the Pennsylvania outline, and that's about $300 to $400 per person, which is just insane to me on a national level. I just didn't really think it'd be that much per person. So finally, I'm going to move on to Russia as a nation. So their police are either called the Police of Russia or just plain old police. They operate under the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and they spend approximately $100 million on policing. That's US dollars. One thing that is different is their hierarchical structure. So, as you can see here, it says Russian police hierarchy, and it's split up into different positions. So, you have the supreme officers, senior officers, junior officers, under officers, sergeants, and soldiers. And one thing about Russia's police is that they've had past issues with understaffed forces and an overabundance of responsibilities. So now they do make it a priority to limit police functions to strictly fighting crime and maintaining public order, which is ironic to the point that a lot of the Russian population brought up, which is the way they describe their police force. They are known to think that their purpose is to punish and extort rather than to protect and serve. So I just thought it was interesting to compare the 2 points like that. So here's just an overview of what I went over in my presentation. So Ireland being a democratic republic and just a one civilian police force. The United States being a democracy and having multiple agencies. And Russia having that Russian police hierarchy structure, and they have one police force, but it branches out into many different positions. Alright, so that's all I have for you guys today, and here are my resources.